Hi, Bio.
Yeah.
For context, for people who are wondering
Mm,
what is happening, I made a post where I was like, Dynamo is not scalable. Well, I didn't say Dynamo is not scalable. I said it's difficult to scale Dynamo. And
mm,
apparently that pulled on a lot of hairs because I got so many responses from people telling me that Dynamo is scalable. The
mm,
reason I reached out to Bio is because his comment was more constructive because he actually explained how to scale Dynamo and
mm.
also mentioned C Sharp's limitation in things like generative design and like complex geometry. Thank you
Hi there.
so much for agreeing to do this. For those who don't know what you do and who you are, just give a short introduction as to what they're expecting today.
Okay, the name is Bayo Windapo. I'm of Nigerian descent, live in Cape Town, South Africa. I mean, at first I was a BIM manager at an architecture firm in Cape Town, and then things went well there. And then I also started a startup there as well that kind of does the same thing as I do now. But then afterwards, I just decided to go off on my own and start Onile. So basically, what we do is to provide services, tech services to small to medium AEC businesses, mostly focusing on architects. So if you need some training on BIM, computational design, and if you need reality capture, like LiDAR technology, you need to scan a building and produce a BIM model from it. I think that's usually called scan to BIM. So we could basically help you develop strategies to train your staff, if you need Revit families, and the whole story. That's what we try to do. And I also get into building apps but usually on a platform called Victor. Um, yeah, that's about it. What we do so far, and research as well. Yeah.
Awesome. So, anywho,
Mm,
let's jump right into what we're talking about today. I already know from the conversation we've had that Dynamo is scalable, apparently. And
I mean,
there's,
well,
yeah.
for you to judge, you will judge.
Well, I think yes. I'll leave whoever's watching. I'll leave you to judge based on your experiences. But I
Mm,
guess I want to know, since you're a very advanced user of Dynamo, what have been your own
mm,
limitations with Dynamo, if you've had any?
mm. Yeah, I mean, so I use Dynamo and Grasshopper, and they both have the advantages in this and disadvantages. But Dynamo, the problem is that it's very slow when it comes to very complex geometrical manipulation. And if you want to start doing, let's say you want to copy a lot of rectangles, like millions of them, for instance, then it starts to really slow down,
Mm-hmm.
That's a limitation at Autodesk. And I know I've spoken to the product manager, Saul, as well. I think he is also quite aware of that. And I think they are doing things to mitigate that. Um, it also doesn't have a lot of analysis tools compared to Grasshopper,
Mm-hmm.
like those Ladybug tools. I know they used to be available in Dynamo previously, but
Mm-hmm.
when I started using it about 5 years ago, it wasn't, I couldn't find any of those things in it. I think it's also because of how slow Dynamo is that they probably discontinued it. I'm not too sure. So those would be the primary issues for me.
Mm-hmm.
But it does have other strengths.
Yes, I think it's important for me to clarify, even though my channel is solely focused
Mhm.
on C sharp, at least for now. Dynamo has a lot
Mm,
of strengths. I don't recommend completely ignoring Dynamo. I tend to
mm,
speak on the side of supporting C sharp because I think a lot of the reasons people are not exploring C sharp is just mental blocks. Because I've seen some very advanced Dynamo scripts that I think would have been much simpler as a C sharp code block, but maybe just because of how the syntax of C sharp can be daunting, people just don't explore. So I'm not in any way, shape,
mm,
or form saying stop using Dynamo. I think there are very simple instances where you need to automate, and running C sharp is just overkill. Um, but I think you
mm,
shouldn't stop your coding journey at Dynamo, is my point. There are more
mm.
tools to explore. You could even
Yes.
go with Python if you prefer. I just
Mm,
suppose I happened to start with C sharp and it's been okay. And I think I've been shocked at how little content there is on C sharp to support people who may want to use
mm,
C sharp. And so that's why my channel
mm,
exists. So
mm,
let's talk about some of the ways you've gotten to scale Dynamo, either for your business or
mm.
other organizations. So how do you typically optimize your scripts so that it can actually be used at scale?
Yes. So one of the ways to use it at scale, I mean, there's a thing like called PyRevit, a
Yeah,
plugin called PyRevit.
yeah.
I'm sure you know about that. So you can use PyRevit to package your Dynamo scripts. So I've done that, but I haven't found it to be very useful, to be honest.
Mm,
There's, the it is still quite slow because Dynamo has to start up each time you run a script, and it's just, it doesn't run as fast. Definitely doesn't run as fast as a C sharp plugin that you've built from scratch in an IDE, I'm sure.
mm-hmm,
But the other way that because I'm more interested in design, the very beginnings,
mm-hmm,
I'm not, because I know a lot of these plugins are usually targeted towards documentation,
mm,
right? But I'm more interested in the very, very beginning. So I'm interested in using Dynamo to create applications because Dynamo has something called a CLI
mm-hmm,
where you can send commands to it
mm-hmm,
without actually opening Dynamo. So for instance, I've used it to build an app that helps people automate the design of parking layouts, right? So they basically run the app on the internet. It sends a command to the Dynamo app in the
mm-hmm.
back end, and then they get a result. So those are the kind of things I'm very interested in. And in that way, Dynamo is very scalable because you can actually use it to build apps that many other people can use, even if they don't know Dynamo, which I would say you can't necessarily do if you're building Revit plugins.
Okay, so we've chatted enough. I think people are probably tired of hearing us chat now. So let's go right into Dynamo. Let's see in real terms what this kind of coding framework looks like.
So what I have on screen here is just a very simple example, because I don't want to bog you guys down with complex Dynamo scripting. Right? So what this is something I called a bounding rectangle.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a workflow that creates a rectangle around two polygons,
Mm-hmm.
right? Okay. So if you have a list of polygons and you just wanted to wrap them around a rectangle at any angle, you can basically use the script to do that. So this was very important for a workflow I created, which is the parking, because then I needed to lay out the pattern at any angle while it's covering the polygon. So yeah, so in this script,
Yeah.
I have this workflow, which is a bounding rectangle
Mm-hmm.
coded in Dynamo,
Mm-hmm.
Dynamo nodes.
Mm-hmm.
Then I have it coded in design script syntax, which
Mm-hmm.
is a language, essentially scripting language that's part of Dynamo,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Then I've done it in Python,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then I've uh, I've made it a custom node, which you can basically install,
Yes.
um, right? And then I've also done it in C sharp. So I'm
Yeah.
basically trying to show you
The
five
different
different ways of
workflows.
doing things in Dynamo, right?
Right.
So you can then decide for yourself if it's scalable or not,
Okay.
right? Okay.
Sure.
All right. Okay. So I'm not going to go too deep into the programming, but basically what we have here is we've got that geometry,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we've got these two geometries over here, which is that one
Mm-hmm.
and this one, okay?
Yes,
Right?
highlighted in blue. Yep.
So highlighted in blue. So what I've done to create the bounding rectangle is we first rotate it, we get a bounding box around it,
Mm-hmm.
we get the min and max point of
Mm-hmm.
the bounding box,
Mm-hmm.
and then we create a vector using the min and max point.
Mm-hmm.
We scale the vector. So I'm going very fast through this
Yes,
because
that's
this is not
okay.
about time.
This is
Yeah,
not a video to learn Dynamo, guys. I'm sorry.
it's not to learn Dynamo.
Yeah.
And then yeah, we get the vector, the x value and the y value, and we use that to create a rectangle. We also translate that, we
Mhm.
translate the point, main point using the scaled vector,
Yes.
and then we basically translate that rectangle, which means move,
Mhm.
and then it basically then creates um, the bounding
Rotation.
rectangle, right?
Okay.
Okay,
Perfect.
so that is, as you can see here, this is a lot longer, right?
Yeah.
Because you've got a lot of nodes. And
Just
if you're trying to build a complex script, like I mentioned, which is about creating parking,
yeah.
the node will be like almost 1,000 nodes. And at that point, Dynamo gets quite slow, to be honest. It can't handle a lot of nodes on the screen. When I got to that point, I was very frustrated because I couldn't zoom in anymore. And it's just, you don't want to do that. So the other thing you can do is to use design script. So this is the exact same thing I'm doing right on top here that I'm doing in here. But
Mhm.
what I've done here is to make this into a function, right?
Mhm.
So you've written a function in here in design script, and then you can call that function as a node, right? So you basically don't have to use these wires that you see on top here to connect a node. You
Mhm.
can just say, I can do this again. I'll just write it here. I can basically call that function. I can say create
Mhm.
bounding rectangle. As you can see, it is calling that function.
Yeah.
And then I can then type the other parameters in there and it will create that same thing. So I can
So,
just reveal it here.
in summary, this code block you have of just two nodes is doing the same
Mm,
function as the other Dynamo group that has maybe up to 12 nodes.
yes.
And in terms of runtime, did you notice that maybe one was faster than the other, or is about the same?
So it's for this kind of small thing, it's about the same. But I
Right.
have heard that design script is a lot faster. It
Okay.
is, okay, maybe not a lot faster, but it is faster. John Pearson has done a test.
Mhm.
I don't know if you know John Pearson. Has done a test between using C sharp
Mhm.
and using regular Dynamo nodes,
Oh,
if I remember correctly.
yeah.
And C sharp is always faster.
Okay,
Mm,
guys, you heard
yeah.
it here first.
So it's easy, but it's usually very like it's very, very
It's a
small
small
times, very small
fraction.
thing. Fraction, but it is
Yes.
fast. But when you start doing a very big graph, I think it starts to, it starts to really be a lot different, right?
Yes.
Um, yeah. So that is, so you can imagine having a very large graph where you build a lot of functions and you're
Mhm.
not connecting all these wires together. You're just calling those functions in these code blocks,
Yeah.
right? So it makes it easier to manage a Dynamo graph because now you don't have too many,
Yeah.
wires all over the
Spaghetti.
place. Yeah. Yeah, the spaghetti that people don't like. And then you can also do it in Python. So all that here and all that, the same thing in the previous graph I showed you up there,
Yeah.
is written
In
over
that
here
node.
in just one node,
Mhm.
right? So the same thing in that one node.
Mhm.
And it's a lot easier to manage as well. A Python script.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
You can do that in Dynamo as well. And then what you can also do to allow many other users in your company to have access, or even other people in the Dynamo community to have access to this script, is
Mhm.
to make it a custom node, which you can publish in the Dynamo package manager, right?
Yes.
So basically, if I double click in here, this is one I've written a long time ago. You can see that, but this is a different version.
Mhm.
It has all those Dynamo nodes within it,
Mhm.
but that has now been packaged
In
as one
just one
custom
node.
node,
Yes.
as one node like that. And it
Yes.
does the exact same thing. If I just preview this again, it does the exact same thing like the others.
Mhm.
Okay, right. Okay, so that has been like, so I've tried to show you, um, a new Dynamo user will typically start from the nodes, but as you get more experience, you should be getting into building custom nodes and you should be using design script. I started using design script from the start.
Mhm.
I don't know how I got into it, but that
It,
it
it, it
just
you
worked
just sort
out
of
that way.
started. So I
Yeah.
think the next node would be C sharp. But before we look at
Mm,
what that is, I know that for someone who's watching this and maybe they've only been using Dynamo out of the box, the first question they're having is, which one should I learn first? Which one is easier to learn? That's the question I always
mm,
get. I've learned that
mm,
when it comes to programming, it doesn't really matter as long as you sort of get started.
mm,
But I guess from your own experience, was there anyone that sort of helped ease you into the process before you started trying other things?
mm. Okay, so I started off using the nodes
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah,
But when I got into the community, I saw people using this very funny script thing. I was like, what is this thing people are using? And then I got into design script. But really, with programming, the thinking is all the same.
yes,
I think the first thing you need to get used to is thinking computationally, thinking about how to break problems into very smaller problems and,
yes,
and then solving those and learning how to put all your little solutions together. So I did this course just for those who might want to get into this,
yeah.
zero touch nodes. John Pearson has a course on design tech unraveled. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And he shows you how to build a zero touch node from scratch.
Awesome.
Very clear. I mean, I was running with it in about a week. I was already, used to it. Yeah,
Okay.
so worth checking out. Okay, so lastly, we have the zero touch node over here, which is also creates the bounding rectangle. If I show
Mm-hmm.
the preview over there, right,
Mm-hmm.
does the exact same thing. Okay, so but with this, if I double clicked on it, you
Mm-hmm.
can't get into it, right?
Yeah.
It's not like uh, a custom node
Yep.
that would allow anyone to see what your code looks like. So if
Yes.
you're a little precious about your work and you don't want anyone to get into it, um, a good idea is to get into C Sharp to build these zero touch nodes. It works exactly like the out of the box nodes because if you use an out of the box node, for instance, this one, which is a number slider, you can't
Mm-hmm.
click on it and open it up
Mm-hmm.
because they're also built in the same way, right?
Right.
So let's take a look at the C Sharp code. All right. So over here, so this is my project. I'm busy working on a package called feasibility. So what it is, it's a package that will help it's mostly for designers. It's targeted toward urban design. So
Mm-hmm.
if you wanted to start to lay out parking, if you wanted to start lay out plots, or you want to be able to program multifamily housing,
Mm-hmm.
housing apartment units.
Mm-hmm.
So this is targeted towards that. So if you think about test fits, basically, I'm
Yes.
making a test fit for Dynamo. So people can do all that stuff within Dynamo without having to go
Mm-hmm.
outside and pay tons of money.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm basically I've started off making the parking nodes
Mm-hmm.
first,
Mm-hmm.
then later on I'll go into the other aspects. So over here you can see, if you look in this C sharp, if you look at my project here, I've got the boundary rectangle
Yep.
over there. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then I have it's called a method. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what it's called in C sharp. Um, So I've got the method here that's
Mm-hmm.
called create bounding rectangle,
Mm-hmm.
and it's got two inputs, which is the polycurve, like you saw in Dynamo, and it's also got the rotation value, right? And it's doing the exact, if you go back in the video, you can compare, it's doing the exact same thing as I did in the design script, right? The difference really is a lot of this stuff that's here and the stuff that's on top here, the namespace and the
Yeah.
classes and right. But the rest of the programming is pretty much the same,
Yeah.
right?
Create a bounding
Okay.
box, rotate the
Yeah.
rectangle, move the rectangle. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And then when we go back to Dynamo, it works the same way. You need to, but please look at John Pearson's course. I'm not going to explain how to make
Sure.
this from scratch here. And I build the solution. And then when I get back in here, I load it, I add it here, the DLL,
Yeah.
and then it basically brings in all of this here. So you see, this is what I've built so far.
Mm-hmm.
The boundary rectangle is over here. Then I've got all these other nodes,
Mm-hmm.
basically. So I've got, I don't know how many nodes now, but it's a lot of stuff there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it works, yeah, the same. But the thing with this now that it's a lot, um, it's faster, as John Pearson in his video he showed,
Mm-hmm.
and it's also you can also publish this on the package manager,
Mm-hmm.
um, which would allow other people in the community to download it, and so also people in your office to download it. Using a Dynamo nodes like that, you don't have access to that kind of scalability, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
My first takeaway from this is that you can load your DLL files into Dynamo the same, maybe in a similar way to how you would load them into Revit. Have you ever had any compatibility issues where maybe a certain version of Dynamo can't read a script you had, or is it forward backward compatible regardless?
Oh, so yeah, there would be that issue because Dynamo, different versions of Dynamo,
Yeah.
I mean, it works the same way with Revit. There's
Yeah.
like .NET,
Yeah.
the .NET compatibility.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure exactly what Dynamo, I think Dynamo version 3 or something
Yes.
is, I can't remember what the latest .NET is.
Four
But yeah,
point
that there
four
would be
point
an
eight.
issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that would create issues as well. So as I imagine it would
In
in
Revit.
a Revit plugin. Yeah.
Okay. So, have you tried this approach for something maybe generative design related or complex geometry related? Because one of the comments that people raised with C Sharp is that they find it more comfortable to work with geometry in Dynamo and they don't see
Mm,
how they could replicate that process in C Sharp.
mm. For sure. So for instance, the parking thing which I've created, I can show you the parking application I created. Let me just bring it up on my browser.
Hmm.
Okay, there we go. So this is built off Dynamo. So
Wow.
this is Victor.
Yeah.
I'm a supporter of this platform because for me it's what I was happy why I was happy about using this platform is that I thought I would only be able to build an app like this in about 5 years. That's what I thought, just in my head. I think maybe 5 years after I finish because I'm busy doing a course
Mm-hmm.
for cloud development. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm gradually doing these courses. And I said, okay, after this course, probably I'll have the skill in about 5 years to do something like this. But Victor already comes pre-packaged with things that allow you to have 3D views, PDFs, um,
Wow.
images, graphs. So all you have to do is with some simple Python programming, but you have to use Python.
Yeah.
With simple Python programming, you can pull in your Dynamo scripts that you've built
Mm-hmm.
and package them into one app, right? So this is the app I built. It basically works off that parking algorithm I built.
Mm-hmm.
And then on a map, a user can come in and draw an outline like this,
Mm-hmm.
and then they run it, and it creates something like that for them. And it
Interesting.
has a lot of inputs which are fed into Dynamo,
Mm-hmm.
right? So for instance, the parking width and parking spot length, parking rotation, and so on. And
Mm-hmm.
then it creates this layout for you, telling you how many parking spots you have, the area of green spaces, and so on. You can make this as complex as you want. It's the sky's the limit. Depends on how creative you are and how far you're willing to go into it.
This is amazing. I
Yeah.
think this is also a good moment to remember that Revit is not BIM. And so, in all your solutioning, it's also good to look at solutions outside the Autodesk space if you
Mm,
can. I imagine this solution will be very helpful for people who maybe don't really use Revit on a day to day, but they need to design their parking. Um,
mm,
in terms
yes.
of this, maybe Could you tell us just a little about Victor and how someone could get started with using Victor?
Okay, so to get started, if you are a Dynamo user with Python skills, I
Mm-hmm.
would certainly recommend taking a look at the channel. I started with a few colleagues. Oh, what happened? My
It's
screen went
showing.
off a little bit.
Yeah.
Is it showing?
Yes.
Okay. Um, so I started this channel with colleagues in Cape Town,
Awesome.
people who are very interested in computational design. So
Mm-hmm.
I created a tutorial here. It's pretty long. It's almost 3 hours,
Mm-hmm.
showing you how to build an app
Mm-hmm.
from start to
Mm-hmm.
finish. So if you watch this from start to finish, you will have published an app like this one, which this is what I actually built on the channel. This
Mm-hmm.
very simple twisting tower.
Mm-hmm.
You will basically build this along with me,
Mm-hmm.
and then you will know how to publish an app on Victor. Very simple. And it
Awesome.
has also has some shows you how to create the outputs over there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also to add images, and also
Mm-hmm.
I put a funny GIF image there as well.
Uh, I mean, what better way to use software than to make ourselves happy? So,
Mhm.
as just for clarity, who owns Victor? Is it open source? Is it owned by a company?
Okay, it's owned by a company. It's not open source. But it's owned by, I mean, it's Victor.
Yeah.
It's owned by Victor.
Yes.
They are a company based in Amsterdam.
Okay.
Mhm. No, no, not Rotterdam. Rotterdam, sorry.
Okay.
Rotterdam, the Dutch company.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're very helpful. And
Awesome.
you ask a question, always happy to help. And this, by the way, is a free public app. So you can build 5 free public apps, but it just has to be public. If
Mm-hmm.
you want to start charging people for it,
Mm-hmm.
then you'll have to get a license of Victor.
Mm-hmm. Well, this
Mm.
has been very enlightening. I think I'm personally also going to give this a try. Fun fact, we also created a computational design group in Nigeria, but I think we didn't go as far as having public channels. It sort of just started and stopped at a WhatsApp group. Might be worth
Okay.
reviving. I think there's a lot of interesting people on there as well who have been
Yeah.
doing a lot of things, even though most of us are now in the diaspora, but it was a very interesting platform just to share ideas. So it's great to see that there was one in SA as well. Um,
Mm,
so just to round up, we started this video sort of resulting from me saying you can't scale Dynamo in your organization. We've established that C Sharp is faster, even though it's by a fraction of a second, but depending on how
mm,
complex your scripting goes, it's probably best to try
mm,
Python or design script or C Sharp. Revit is built on C Sharp, so it's always possibly going to be the fastest because you're interacting with the API in a sort of more direct way instead of going through
exactly. Mm,
Iron Python. What would you suggest to someone who's a young BIM manager just starting out and maybe the firm doesn't have a lot of support for that department just yet and they're writing all these Dynamo scripts and they're finding it
mm,
maybe challenging to scale because I think
mm,
yes you can scale with Dynamo but a lot of people just don't know how. Would you say they should explore zero touch nodes or PyRevit or like what in just
mm,
your own experience what would you recommend starting with for scaling apps?
mm. Yeah, so I started with the Dynamo scripting and with the nodes,
Yeah.
which I showed you, right?
Yeah.
And
Zero
then I
touch
started to pack,
nodes.
and sorry, no, just with the Dynamo out of the box nodes,
Okay,
right?
perfect. Yeah.
And I started wrapping them into um, what do we call this thing in Revit? It's
Dynamo
the
player.
Dynamo player.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dynamo player.
Okay.
I started trying to get people to use that. People don't use that. Somehow it doesn't work,
Yeah.
doesn't scale. I think people just don't like to go to a random button at the
At the
right
far
of their
end of
screen.
the hidden tab that no one ever opens. Yes. I
And then it
agree.
takes so long to open, and
And then it's
people just lose
loading
interest at
and
that point.
loading. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was more traction when it was added as a PyRevit, when we use PyRevit to publish the nodes on the as a Revit ribbon. So we had a special tab.
Mm-hmm.
Then everyone knew that was the company's scripts. So the advantage of that is that it wasn't just about Dynamo. I could also link to folders that were on the server,
Mm-hmm.
that would typically be very difficult to find. Let's say folders that contained
Mm-hmm.
details,
Mm-hmm.
folders that contained some company standards or something. That
Mm-hmm.
could also be added in the ribbon. And then we also have the Dynamo scripts,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but our scripting was more focused on uh, documentation, which is what I think a lot of Revit plugins do.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted to start creating sheets, maybe you wanted to make something that automatically takes all your rooms and throw them on sheets and dimensions them.
Mm-hmm.
But once you start getting into very complex geometry and you want to do early stage analysis, it is just you have to get back into Dynamo and or Grasshopper. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you have your own channel, right, Bio?
Computational Design SA.
This has been really great. Please keep up with Bio's work on LinkedIn. His name is Bio Windapo, and it's also the same name on LinkedIn. A lot of interesting work coming out of onile.ai, and please also support this channel. Thank you so much. This
Please.
has been very
Yeah.
enlightening.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to coming back and having more of these discussions.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Subscribe to my channel.